Just because they're declared medically dead, it doesn't mean that there's no chance of them coming back. If we're going to actually beat what Jesus did, the person would actually have to be dead 3 days or more, right? They would have to be declared dead medically, because we know that Jesus, they made sure he was dead. And then they would have to stay dead for 3 to 4 days. And then they would have to come back to life. And that is not something that we have seen again.
When you say Harris, nobody knows who the hell you're talking about. No, nobody has any idea. Harris. Hey, where's Harris? They know Kamala. They know Kambabla. That was the nickname I used for a while, but I don't use it anymore because everyone thought I was just mispronouncing her name. I wasn't. Kambabla.
Wesley Huff, ladies and gentlemen, historian, theologian, and the Central Canada Director for Apologetics, was on the Joe Rogan Experience. They had a very curious and, I would say, enthusiastic, candid conversation about Jesus. And I loved every moment of it. They talked about other things as well, but some of the parts about Jesus were my favorite parts. Welcome to CozyCorner TV, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Kieran Smith. Call me Q, and we are on the corner, ladies and gentlemen. We're on the corner. So Wesley Huff presented this take on the death and resurrection of Jesus for a question that Joe Rogan asked him. Now, Joe Rogan asked him a couple of questions, and if you have been following Joe Rogan, any part of his show over the years, you know that over the last few years, Joe Rogan has had a couple of guests on, and he's had a lot of interesting conversations pertaining to Jesus Christ, the resurrection, the life and death of Jesus Christ, who he was. So this, amongst many, was just one of my favorite conversations that he had. And I really enjoyed Wesley Huff's take on the death and resurrection. I enjoyed how he kind of explained how the Jewish people looked at time, because Joe Rogan asked about the 3 days that Christ was in the grave. There were lots of good things they touched on. So this clip right here is about 14 minutes. I'm probably going to react to about 10 minutes of it or so. My wife said the whole entire thing is good, so I should react to all of it. But I'm only going to do about 10 minutes or so of it. We might go a little bit deeper. So let's jump right in and check out this awesome conversation.
The Joe Rogan Experience. Because of this claim that they say they saw Jesus resurrected. Like, there's something different that goes on there. That they're like, this is a miracle, right? Dead people don't usually rise from the dead.
So what is your personal belief when it comes to the resurrection? What do you think happened? Do you have a belief, or do you just try to interpret the text and try to see what is the message?
Well, I think, so as a historian, I do think it is a historical question. You have a guy who objectively lived, he objectively died, and then individuals close to his inner circle claim that they see him not dead.
Right.
Again.
This is a highly unusual activity.
Highly unusual.
Right. So, but it's hard when you're dealing with illiterate populations, you're dealing with thousands of years of time, you're dealing with an oral tradition, and then you have us sitting here talking about it in 2024, trying to figure it at the end of 2024, trying to figure this out, literally the end,
yeah.
the last couple of days. It's very difficult for anybody who thinks of themselves as an intelligent person who's secular to even entertain the possibility that someone died and come back to life.
And again,
now, in case you guys haven't noticed, I have sped this up a little bit just for copyright purposes. I hope you guys can keep up with it. I'll slow it down just a tad bit. But this question here specifically that Joe Rogan asked, and he also makes a statement that it's very hard for a secular person who's intelligent to even entertain the idea that someone died and came back to life. And he's absolutely right. I can't tell you how many times I've had these conversations with different groups of people, and not just the death and resurrection of Christ trips people up, but also the birth of Christ trips people up. You'll hear many people say like, oh my goodness, like a virgin having a baby, like, come on now. Not realizing that, you know, there's explicit scripture about God not hiding himself from people. He doesn't hide himself from people. There's also scripture stating that God also makes things known to, I'm paraphrasing it for lack of better terms, the simple-minded, the common person, the lay person, that a lot of the things that are deep and of spiritual meaning, actually the intelligent person is more likely to miss it. So when Joe Rogan says like this is hard for like a person who is secular and intelligent to even entertain this, he's absolutely right. I've been in plenty of conversations where someone has said like me even entertaining this is absolutely ridiculous.
Get that. But we've already talked about the fact that we don't think that the only thing that exists is matter and motion. We as in you and I, right? Like we believe that there's something else going on in this world that's a little bit crazy.
There's something else.
And that to I think exclude that, I think exclude something that you're kind of putting blinders on. Yeah. For. And you do have, I mean, you're right in terms of all of these ancient conventions and the ways that things were spread around, but the Gospels are written in the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. And they're written in this period of time where you have groups of individuals who could have fact-checked those things. So,
how do you fact-check someone coming back from the dead?
Well,
how many people saw his body, right?
Well, Paul says that 400 people saw him all at once.
400 people saw the crucifixion?
No, saw the resurrected Jesus. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says that Jesus appeared to the disciples, and then he appeared to 400 people all at once. I mean, if we read the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Luke and Acts, so same author wrote these both documents, he says that Jesus was walking around teaching them for 40 days after he was resurrected from the dead. And so these are written within a time period when you have people who would have seen Jesus' ministry, who were there, say, at something like the feeding of the 5,000, who could have been able to verify or debunk some of these things that are being said. And you go from a bunch of scared guys who, because Jesus wasn't the only messianic figure who arose and claimed to be the Messiah.
Right.
So Wesley says Jesus wasn't the only messianic figure who rose and claimed to be the Messiah. There were many who did this. It's just that Jesus just happened to be the one that wasn't bluffing. And it's also interesting here that Wesley says, like, you know, a lot of this stuff is from eyewitnesses. So this is from firsthand account eyewitnesses. So this is not like, you know, the game of telephone where rumors are being passed down, and then when it gets to the last person, everything kind of sounds like jargon. These are people who were firsthand eyewitnesses. They walked with Jesus. They were part of his community. They saw the things that he did. They spent time with him daily. So Joe Rogan asks a great question when he says, how do you fact check, you know, someone being risen from the dead? And Wesley Huff does a great job at explaining to him why.
There were a number of individuals both prior to and after Jesus, but they die and the movement dies with them.
Do you think it's possible that he didn't die? And do you think it's possible that they thought he was dead? Because that does happen. There was actually a case very recently where a guy was about to be harvested for organs. They thought he was dead, and this guy started moving again and came back to life. It's a very, very bizarre case because his family had been told that he was going to be harvested for organs. They were preparing for that. Yeah. This guy comes back.
Yeah, I mean, we know.
Now, the question that Joe Rogan asked, I think it's a great question. I don't think it's silly in any way. And it's actually a pretty legitimate question. We know that there have been cases of people being, they've been claimed medically dead, but it's been to just that extent, just medically dead. And I say that because Jordan Peterson had a conversation, I believe it was with Bill Maher, where he explained this, and maybe it wasn't. It might have been Lee Strobel and Sean Ryan who had this conversation actually, and it was a great conversation. But he talked about the difference between someone being declared medically dead, and just because they're declared medically dead, it doesn't mean that there's no chance of them coming back. So when Joe Rogan asked that question, he says, you know, there was just something that recently happened. It's possible. As a matter of fact, if you go on the Google and you just do a little bit of research, it says that, you know, a person can be declared medically dead. I believe it's up to 10 to 15 minutes. So before like there's some sort of brain damage, and then even past that, it's not that the person can't survive. It's just that, you know, their chances of them recovering decreases. But this stuff isn't impossible. It's not impossible. As a matter of fact, if you even look up like how fast can you remove organs from a body, some organs have to be removed within minutes of the body dying. Some organs you have a couple of hours. But if you look at how fast organ donation takes place, or how fast a person would be harvested for their organs after death, they actually try to do it as soon as possible. So if someone just passed away, they would probably move them into another room pretty much immediately if they saw that they were on an organ donor list to start harvesting them for their organs. So if this person were to wake up within 10, 15, possibly even 20 minutes after them dying, I don't find that like amazing. Like that doesn't do anything for me. That doesn't make me be like, oh my God, it's a miracle. Now, someone being dead, and this is where, you know, people say like, well, you know, what Jesus did, it could be done. No, it actually can't. Because if we're going to actually beat what Jesus did, the person would actually have to be dead 3 days or more, right? They would have to be declared dead medically, because we know that Jesus, they made sure he was dead. And then they would have to stay dead for 3 to 4 days. And then they would have to come back to life. And that is not something that we have seen again.
We know a lot about Roman crucifixion. And we know that, and we know that they did their job well.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, if you look at, say, very skeptical biblical scholars, like non-believing, atheist, agnostic, Christian scholars, they will say if we can know anything about Jesus, like they'll cast it down on a lot of the things that we read about in the Gospels in terms of the actual historical Jesus of Nazareth. They'll say one thing we can be sure of is that he died by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. Because we have not just multiple attested documents that we refer to as the New Testament, but Roman and Greek and Jewish writers refer to that claim afterwards and talk about the fact that you have this guy, and it's mocked within earliest Christianity. So one of our earliest, in fact, not one of, the earliest depiction of Jesus on the cross is called the Alexamenos Graphido. And it's probably from the end of the 1st century, and it's it depicts an individual with their arms raised in an act of worship, worshiping a man with a donkey's head who's being crucified.
Wow.
And right side it says Alexamenos worships his God in Greek.
Whoa.
And it's mocking, right? Because crucifixion was for the lowest of the low. It was for like slaves. In fact, if you were a Roman citizen, you were banned from being crucified.
Who
Facts.
was crucified upside down?
Peter.
What was it? Because like regular crucifixion wasn't good enough for him, or what was it? What didn't deserve it because Christ had gone through it?
Well, so the story is that they say we're going to crucify you, and he says it's like too big of an honor to die like my Lord, and they say, well, we can fix that.
Oh Jesus.
I love the way Wesley Huff broke that down. Like, you know, Joe Rogan asked, who was it that was crucified upside down? And Wesley Huff says it was Peter. And he asked, what's the story behind that? And Wesley Huff says, you know, well, Peter says that it's too much of an honor for me to die the way that my Lord did. And the Roman soldiers like, well, we can fix that. I love the way he breaks that down, because there's so much skepticism around, you know, did Jesus really die? And I mean, literally, if you guys go and you actually just do the research yourself, there's so much around this, like, oh, maybe he really didn't die, or maybe it looked like he was dead, or maybe he just kind of passed out, and then when he was in the tomb, you know, he woke up. And it's like, this is how you can tell that people just simply do not study their history. If you just want to take away religion, if you can't get with the whole Jesus thing, that's fine. We can set that aside. But if you just study Roman crucifixion, these guys were good at what they did. So someone who spent time in the Marine Corps, I love the fact that I've served my country. I love the time in the Marine Corps. I learned a lot. And with that being said, I got a chance to train with some pretty hardcore people. So I mean, Green Berets, snipers, you name it, I was probably around them. Some I can't talk about. But let's just say, like, I've been around some of the best of the best. And when these guys go to snipe, it doesn't matter what distance that they're sniping from. When I say that they don't miss, they don't miss. Like, this is what they do. Like, this is they get paid to do this. They can't necessarily do it in their sleep because it's a sniping job. But you get what I'm saying. Like, if they're going to hit a target, they're like, I'm hitting that target. Like, I'm not missing that target. These were the Romans with crucifixion. Like, this was their specialty. This was what they did. Like, if this was something that was on their resume, it would be top notch, #1. Like, these guys didn't miss. You weren't going into a Roman crucifixion and coming out alive. It wasn't going to happen. And they left you up there for however long it took for you to basically drown in your own blood or asphyxiate.
Shut your mouth, buddy.
Listen, the Romans were pretty brutal.
Oh, yeah.
But this is why we know, like, we have... It's interesting. We know a lot about crucifixion, but crucifixion was seen as so disgusting. I believe it was Cicero who said that, like, the word crucifixion shouldn't even be on a Roman man's lips. I mean, the word excruciating,
right.
X is off of in Latin, and cruce, off the cross.
Oh,
So that's where we get that word, is because this was designed to humiliate, and it was designed to be as painful as possible. It was actually a really good article done by JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, which was done by a number of, I think it was in the 70s, or the early 80s. It was done by a group of biblical scholars and then medical professionals. And so they looked at the conventions of what we do know about Roman crucifixion, and then they looked at the descriptions in the gospel to try to figure out, okay, if we could diagnose how Jesus died, how would he have died? And so they basically came up with this idea that he probably asphyxiated to death. You kind of drown in your own blood. But the chances of Jesus surviving the crucifixion, I think, are narrow to none. And the chance of him appearing 3 days later, completely fine. I mean, if the first thing you do, if you survive crucifixion and then you go and you find your disciples, the first thing you say is not, peace be with you. It's get me to a hospital, right?
Did it happen back then?
No.
Are we entirely certain of their measurement of days?
So this is an interesting question because of the differences between when the Gospel of John says Jesus died compared to the Synoptics, because John appears to be using the Roman convention of counting time, and the other Gospels, when they describe the timing, appear to be using the Jewish ones. And actually,
Okay, so I wanted you guys to hear what Wesley was saying about the time difference, and I want you to pay attention to this because Joe Rogan is asking this question for a very specific reason. He's basically trying to see if Jesus had any recovery time, like maybe he really didn't die, and because he had some decent time of resting, he just woke back up. But Wesley Huff shuts that down, and he does a great job at it.
if you correlate between the two, they match up pretty well. So the thing is, with Jews, any part of a day was considered a day. So 3 days and 3 nights becomes almost an idiom for any part of that day is the day. So if Jesus, and because they count evening and morning, evening to morning is the day, it's very possible that it wasn't like how we would think of 3 24-hour days, especially if he dies on Friday and wakes up on Sunday.
So that would actually make it less time than more time.
Yeah.
So it's not like he had recovery time.
Oh, no. Okay.
It's 3 days at once.
Oh, no.
Yeah, then 400 people saw him afterwards.
That's the claim that Paul makes.
Paul makes it.
Yeah.
And then how many different people have some sort of a recollection or a writing or something that's attributed to them of being witness to his resurrection?
We have Peter, Paul, Jude, James, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The thing with Matthew, Mark, and Luke is that Matthew and John are attributed to direct disciples of Jesus. Luke and Mark are not. So they are not eyewitnesses within the Jesus community. In fact, Luke prefaces his gospel by saying that.
Yep.
He's right up front about this. He's like, hey, I'm not an eyewitness, don't confuse me with an eyewitness. But he actually uses conventional writing, what's the term I'm looking for? He uses writing conventions of the day that would fit within regular biography that was written within the Roman world. So you have a guy named Quintilian, who is basically, I mentioned him before, with he's teaching people how to write, and he says that if you're going to write biography, you need to be interviewing eyewitnesses, and you can't be too far away from the event to be able to write these things. And Quintilian, Lucian, and Josephus, who are all these very prominent ancient biographers and writers of history, have a lot of crossover in the way they describe how you should write history with the words that Luke uses at the beginning of his gospel, where he says, I'm interviewing eyewitnesses and I'm writing up an orderly account. And so he's saying, I'm going to use these methods that are expected as good history of my day. I'm not an eyewitness, so I'm going to try to find the people who are eyewitnesses, and I'm going to try to encapsulate this within a document that communicates what is being written.
So we have
So I love the fact, I'm going to pretty much stop there because I really want you guys to go watch this. Give Joe Rogan and Wesley their duly earned views. But I love the way that Wesley breaks that down there, because this is another thing that sitting with different people and just talking about, just being curious about God and them asking me questions, hey, why are the Gospels so different? Why does this story conflict with this? Why does this seem to contradict this? And I love the way he just broke that down, just basically going off of Luke. Like he said, Luke wasn't an eyewitness. We know that Luke wasn't an eyewitness, but Luke does in fact start off his gospel like, hey, I wasn't there, but I'm doing what I need to do. I'm interviewing witnesses. I'm letting you know that I'm talking to people that I went and I interviewed these types of people. And Luke is also the author of the book of Acts. So Luke does his due diligence when he is like his gospel account. He does his due diligence. When Quintilian is teaching people how to write, there's a standard on how to teach people how to write. And Wesley just talked about that. You can't be too far away from the events. You have to be interviewing interviewing people. You have to be interviewing eyewitness people who were specifically there. And this would be familiar to us because our journalists today would have to do something like that to cover a story. So when people are asking these different types of questions like, hey, why does this gospel contradict with this one? I love explaining the fact that they don't contradict. You also have to keep in mind that these are all different people. You know, Luke is not Mark. Mark is not John. John is not Matthew. Luke is not Matthew. All three of them were different men. They all had different professions. They all had different ways that they approached life. And that manifests in their gospel. Just the way today that if a doctor, a lawyer, a garbage man, and a school teacher were writing the gospels, there would be different things that the garbage man would write that the teacher wouldn't write, and the teacher would pay especially attention to, that probably a doctor would ignore, and a doctor would pay close attention to something that the lawyer would think is useless. So we have to keep in mind that, you know, these are real people, like when it comes to these eyewitness accounts for Jesus, and they're writing, you know, as their real selves. It's manifesting from who they are, and it's God breathed. It's from the Spirit. So I'm dying to know what you guys think about this conversation. You know, we are going to cover very broad topics on this channel. I'm not afraid of any hard topics, so it doesn't matter if it's about race, religion, therapy, politics. I'm going to be all over it. So, and I want you guys to be on top of it as well. So even if it's a hard topic for you, I still want to know what you think about it. Where do you sit at when it comes to your faith? Do you have a faith? Do you go to church? You know, how are you about religion? What do you think about Jesus? What do you think about Joe Rogan and Wesley Huff having this conversation, you know, about Jesus and the death and resurrection, you know, and how he kind of comes with the information that he gives Joe Rogan, one of the biggest podcasters in the world. So go ahead, guys, light up the comment section. Tell me what you think about this conversation. And until next time, guys, thanks for stopping by and chilling on the corner with me. Take care of yourselves, love one another, and be peaceful. Peace.